Yeah.
Good evening, councillors and officers. It's 6:30. First of all, bit of housekeeping. We are not expecting any fire alarms or anything, but if it does go off, it will mean there is a problem. So it's going out the back and out and meet into the park on that one. And obviously, mobile phones, either switch them off or silence them. Other than that, I think on that issue, that's the one. The agenda. Apologies, I have at the moment Councillor James to replace Councillor Durham and Councillor Mackay to replace Councillor Bowles. Item 2, declaration of interest. Is there any? No. There is no urgent matters. Item 3. Item 4, minutes of the last meeting. Have you all... Councillor Harvey.
Sorry, Chair. A couple of bits, if I could. On the Serco item, 13/22, I just wanted to pick up the point about where it's coming back to, because we raised that at the end as to it wasn't just left as the item finished. Resolved, the committee noted the presentation, but we also wanted them back again, didn't we?
We certainly did.
And I'm just conscious of that to be recorded, if we could capture that.
We didn't have a time span, but we said we'd invite them back. I don't know whether we need, as a committee, to actually figure a date now, but I would imagine it'll be next year now.
If we could capture that would be really helpful.
In our minutes, that we intend to invite them back.
I don't want to be a wordsmith, but there was some of it was fairly strongly expressed, and I just wanted the words to perhaps reflect the strength, the feeling of the committee, if we could find a way of just maybe emphasising some of the points in the list, because I think all of us had some really strong points to make about it. And then on the town centre one, which I think is really important, if you go to the bottom of page 7, and I think it's just semantics, the final bullet point says opposed to 1,800 dwellings, but the preceding bullet point is a little confusing, and it's the point that I was making at the time. The strategy needed to tie in with the local plan, in particular the height of block of flats and the density of the area. It wasn't so much that it tied in with the local plan, it was the point that what was being said was something we were objecting to. There was real concern about the height of the buildings in the policies and the way the policies were written. So that was the context of that particular bullet point. If I could clarify that, I would be very grateful, as that was what was raised.
God, I didn't even have the mic. Just on this, in case people aren't aware, the reason the panel never sat last time was because of the death of the Queen, and so therefore it will be sitting after this meeting, so it'll be reporting back to us. Is there any comments on the terms of reference at all?
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of thoughts, really, to embellish this. I'm conscious we've not got the preceding terms of reference that used to exist. I'm not sure whether these are simply a carbon copy of what was, so I'm not sure on that point. But just to pick up a couple of points on them nonetheless. The Chair of the panel will make a report to the Scrutiny Committee as appropriate on recommended actions. there should be a record of the meeting anyway, regardless of whether it's appropriate or not. There should just be a record, shouldn't there, somewhere that it met and that the meeting did take place, rather than just as appropriate coming back. It's not minuted. So how do we record that the panel met and the panel did something if it's not appropriate? Surely something must be recorded that it met at least, that it happened.
Why isn't it minuted?
I'm just intrigued why there's no minutes really in that sense. It just, I've never come across that where a panel would meet and there'd be, I get it from a members advisory panel from the cabinet, but I've never known a panel meet or a committee of the council meet without any minutes being taken.
It's because it's not recognised as an official meeting within the constitution.
So on that basis, Chair, do we now need to get this recognised in the constitution? Because if it is a panel of the body of the council that's doing a piece of work, surely it should be recognised in the constitution. If that's the case, I'll pick it up with you.
Yeah, from the chair, I think I'd like to see them minuted. It's something that perhaps we could talk about and get.
I don't think we would look to minute them because they're not. But we can pick it up.
Because what I don't want to do is have a panel meeting and things get lost somewhere because they're not being reported back. As we all do, make mistakes. That's the idea of having these minuted. And I'd like to. Sorry.
That's why the chair obviously brings back any thoughts from the panel that they wish to raise.
Yeah. Well,
we can pick it
I
up.
think
We can pick it up and consider how we might be able to do
yeah,
that.
I think we should be looking at it, not just this panel, but any panel across the council.
Should we change it to the constitution?
Sorry, so the style of the report that you have here tonight is the style of the report that will go to performance panel. The update from the chair is entirely up to the chair how they wish to present that information.
Right, so if the chair of the panel chooses to make that a written report,
Then the chair can obviously submit it for submission to scrutiny.
so as a minimum we could ask that the report is presented in writing.
If the chair wishes to write a report,
If
yes.
there's some reason why the meeting can't be minuted, then as a minimum a written report.
Yes, but the chair would write the actual report.
Yeah.
We might want to ask the chair.
Yeah.
I'm happy to do a brief report for the sake of democracy and making sure that everybody knows what's going on. I don't think I'll use mime or dance.
Councillor James.
Thank you. So I'm just picking up on the terms of reference. Are we saying within those terms of reference that they're going to meet? How often is the committee going to meet or the group going to meet? Is it saying every 6 months? Is that what it's saying? I don't think that's enough. I think that the piece of work that this committee should do is crucial, and I think it should be. Historically, it used to meet more than that, and I think it needs to meet much more often. And I think these are disappointing terms of reference. I think we should want more from that panel. So I think it's in relation to the KPIs that we've got now. I know we're going to have a discussion about that later, but I think that we need to be reviewing the KPIs, and I think that we should look at each area of the council, for, in relation to customer services, for example, and then we look at the terms of reference, look at the KPIs that are there, and maybe the committee does a piece of work each time on each area of the council, housing or in relation to climate change, and I think that we need to they need to look at those. We're not going to have enough time now in detail, set against existing policies and what some of those measurements are. But we're not going to get much work done if it's only going to meet every 6 months. I think it has to be very different to that. And I think that in relation to setting KPIs for the council, we need to look at a whole list of areas that are not included at the moment within the KPIs. So I'd like us to look again at these terms of reference, please.
So it'd be really useful as a committee, you could agree this evening what you want those terms of reference to be.
Sorry, Councillor Gordon.
That's fine. So I suppose I agree with you that I think those things absolutely need looking at. I just wonder if actually that's better as a committee for us to do, and almost for, as part of the terms of reference, perhaps for the performance panel to highlight areas that are worth proper scrutiny of the full scrutiny committee, because that to me makes a bit more sense, and then we don't have the problems with things not being minuted, or you know, we can have things properly out in the open and public.
Councillor James.
So if you were, you know, so I would want, I'm not on this committee, so, but, you know, I would want to say, look at housing, the whole area of housing against the homeless strategy, the housing strategy, all of the other aspects of housing, and against what we've already got and what we should have in there, you know. And I'll raise it later, but, you know, we used to have KPIs on empty homes. They're not there now. Why aren't they there now? And I would want those to be included in future KPIs. They always were. So, you know, there's a whole area, and how do you do, it's quite a detailed piece of work, and do you do that in this committee, or do you do it in the performance panel committee that then does that and then reports back to this committee as to what it's done?
So I think the original purpose of the performance panel was purely to look at performance KPIs, potentially seek to have an update on specific projects, and I believe previously also had an update specifically on the anvil once a year. The previous committee chair, along with the previous panel chair, along with the panel at the time, decided that actually there wasn't enough difference between the KPIs each quarter, and therefore they were the ones that asked for it to move to just a twice yearly meeting, because they felt that there was actually more information to discuss during those sessions. The types of things that you're just discussing now are things that would be key items on the full scrutiny agenda. Oh, so it's not that you can't bring them back, but they would be heard by the committee rather than just the panel. So the panel really is about looking at the performance monitoring itself, and as Councillor Golding has noted, generally then identifying where they've got key concerns, bringing that back to committee to decide on whether there is an agenda item you want to bring to committee.
Councillor Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just picking that up then. If the performance panel is going to meet to do effectively retrospective performance management, I understand that bit. If this committee is then going to commit to having an agenda item on a regular basis to review, for example, green infrastructure strategy says we should have these KPIs, well, do we? And if we don't, why don't we? And should we? The housing strategy says we should have these KPIs, why don't we? And again, so if there's a review mechanism within that, that's fine. But it's how we achieve that end, because at the moment, we as members should have oversight of that, because they're our KPIs to hold the organisation to account.
So I think we just need to understand what those issues are and ensure that they're not already scheduled in for CEP or EPH. So obviously, as long as they're having scrutiny and overview, it's obviously picking up here anything that's not already within the work programme that you feel that you need to have a look at.
Forgive us, I mean, just thinking about that point, say CEP gets the Green Infrastructure Strategy to review, it will review the strategy and approve it. In that strategy, there'd be a set of KPIs. CEP doesn't decide which KPIs do and don't get into the documents and get into who we as members somehow have got to capture who decides that point, and then understand what they are in the form of the presentation and the spreadsheet we get.
So the KPIs, that, for example, that are here this evening are going to Cabinet for approval on the 11th of October. So Cabinet will approve the actual performance indicators, followed by, but obviously they seek recommendations and comments from scrutiny. So if you take the green infrastructure and the green strategy, actually as part of the regular updates that go back to the other overview committees, they do actually look at how they are actually performing. So, but I think it's a case of actually what is it you want to bring back once you've reviewed the KPIs, and then understanding where they may best fit into the work programme?
I'm totally confused and I apologise. Cabinet cannot mark its own homework. Cabinet can't be the arbiter of what KPIs. Scrutiny has the responsibility as a healthy critical friend to say these are the KPIs we wish to look at for the organisations. Surely there's got to be some relationship there. Cabinet itself can't set the KPIs. Surely not. That's not an executive function, is it?
No.
Is it? Should it be? Is it? So they actually get to set their own homework.
So they will set the KPIs against the council plan, but obviously they will seek to get recommendations and comments from Scrutiny in doing that.
It has to be more than recommendations. This committee surely has to look at the whole area of the council and look at what they would like to see scrutinised as part of the KPIs. And just if I take an example in relation to, I'm going to raise it at the next part of the agenda, but if you look at customer centre provision of the service in relation to customer complaints is different to customer queries or where someone writes in or something. So what we need to look at, or what you need to look at as a scrutiny, what is a complaint as against when somebody writes in and they're not happy about something. So we need to look at the whole area of customer satisfaction and customer service. And then is there then going to be another KPI that sits underneath that relates to when a resident writes in that they're not happy with something, they're raising an issue, and then whether it was dealt with? Because they assume that that's a complaint, but looking into that isn't a complaint. So I think there's a big piece of work that needs to be done as to what KPIs are going to be within this full document. And I think it's, that's, and I'm not sure that this can be done within this committee. I think it's a very detailed piece of work, but I think it needs to be done outside of this and fed back into that. And I'm not sure that it's right that Jackie writes the report. She may be happy to do that, but I don't think that's for her to do that. I think that's an officer that should be doing that piece of work to support her. That's a big ask of a councillor, and I don't think that as a chair is something that she should be doing.
So I'm not going to comment on the last piece because that's obviously just the constitution and the way it works at the moment. Jackie doesn't have to do a written report. She can just do a verbal update if that's what she wishes to do. In terms of what you're talking about, this is the corporate scorecard. So these are the things that, overall for the organisation. Sitting below that, there are service plans that have a whole raft of KPIs and indicators that support the individual service areas. So obviously you will have missed the conversation that we've previously had at this committee that talked about the fact that we plan to publish those, so that actually there is information that at a lower level, which is about how the service operationally operates, as opposed to how that meets the corporate objectives that sit in the corporate scorecard. So those KPIs do currently exist, and I wouldn't expect, for example, to bring the entire, customer services piece back. So, interestingly, will now be hopefully January, the customer strategy is coming to Scrutiny, the new draft of that Scrutiny, which obviously gives you an opportunity to look at the whole customer piece. In terms of the KPIs, it would be if you had a specific concern, because obviously the customer services piece, process, practice, etc., the way in which all the systems work are all audited and they go to Audit and Accounts Committee. If there is a specific concern that comes out of that, they could refer that back to Scrutiny, and Scrutiny then could choose to look at that specific item. But you wouldn't necessarily just bring the whole service back. You'd have to bring back what it is that you're concerned about.
Well, as I understand it, I understand where you're coming from. I think you're not far off. But as a committee, we can ask to look at anything. Yep. And if we decide to look at something and find that it needs someone, Jackie's committee to look into it a little bit deeper for time reasons or whatever, we can do that. I do accept what you're saying about the minuting. We're going to be talking about that at some stage. But that's an aside on that. It doesn't mean that we can't look at things, but if we make the if we make it too big, we'll end up looking at everything and nothing will come out because there'll be too much. We've got to do it piecemeal, I suppose you would say. So if we're looking at housing, for instance, we have a problem with, I don't know, for argument's sake, bed and breakfast or whatever, or what is happening to homeless people, that is a piece of work that can come here. We can look at it and we say, well, we're not really getting deep enough into it. Can we put it on to another working party or Jackie's thing so we can see where we're going? I think that's what you're trying to say, but you're trying to put it all in one lump. And if we do, I don't think it'll be overworked. I'll get Jackie.
Thank you, Chair. I think what might make sense, if I'm understanding what I'm hearing, is it may be that it'd be worth putting a fourth term of reference around reviewing referred service areas that require looking into. Words to that effect. Does that sound?
You'd have to be more than every 6 months, won't it?
And I think, yeah, and I agree. I've gone along with the 6 months as that was sort of recommended, I think, which was based on officers' workloads and things, and how things work. But I do think even if it was quarterly, that might be better because it would give us a better chance to have an opportunity. And if there isn't a lot to be looked at because everything's hunky-dory, then that would be fine. Yeah. But leastways, we'd have that calendared. I'd rather see that performance is really scrutinised properly to make sure we're delivering great service to residents. Yeah. It's something I feel really strongly about.
Completely agree.
And in that, so we're saying that pieces of work are being done in CEP or in audit. How are those things that are concerns, how do you, Chair, pick up those? So when we're looking at the green infrastructure strategy in EPH, who, in relation to some of those aspects that need to be scrutinised or, that need a KPI or not have a KPI, who is doing that piece of work across the board that then would feed back into the performance panel?
So it would be up for each committee, if they want to make a recommendation to scrutiny, they would obviously do that, and that would come through the recommendations of that particular committee. I would not perceive that another committee would recommend something goes to performance panel. They would probably recommend it to go to another formal committee.
Thank you. So as a committee chair myself, for me, I would expect that to come through on a work programme request, which are really easy to fill out, but that would be really helpful in terms of I want to see this KPI, I want to look at the KPIs for this area, I want to look at this, I want to look at that. If you can be that specific on a work programme request form, then we can know that we can get a really good report that looks exactly, and we can then lead committee through all of those details and make relevant recommendations. And the system should work, it's there to work. And I always quite appreciate it when I do get work programme request forms.
That's Tristram.
This is a bit of a contentious question. Is this an indicator that perhaps we're not working our systems properly that are currently in place and the processes we've got in place? And maybe that's what we need to scrutinise.
I do think so.
And maybe we don't, and which is why the panel was disbanded previously, because it kind of all wasn't there.
So obviously scrutiny and overview protocol went to council last time and was approved. So we have just approved the actual scrutiny overview protocol. And obviously it is part of the conversations that are going through the Constitutional Working Group and will form part of the Constitution update. So that is actually currently being scrutinised and discussed.
Councillor Harvey.
Just on that point, I think the idea of using task and finish panels has been an important conversation, far more than we currently do, because not everything can be done in committee, and that's where the performance panel comes in really important, because it can do that deep dive piece of work that the committee can't necessarily do itself. The point about the work programme request forms are sometimes perhaps in EPH and CEP, when, for example, the green infrastructure strategy or, for example, other things come forward, because that's what I can think in my head at the moment. If the debate of the committee is such that there are things that fall out of that as recommendations, the team supporting with the chair, as the officer team support, need to be able to reference to yourself, to reference to the chair of performance, that there's this linkage going on, and at the moment that linkage isn't there because it either relies on us as members to make that work request, or if the recommendation is on the floor of the committee because you've read the paper, you've discussed the point, nonetheless, part of that recommendation that comes should be, we need somebody else to look at this, we need somebody else to do that. And that isn't going on by those two committees that it can do because the Constitution now allows it to happen. We've just got to facilitate, and that puts a hell of a lot of pressure on them services to whether they've got the resources to do that for us, which raises the question we've been asking for a long time.
So just obviously to clarify, the chairs meet quarterly to actually discuss all the work programme items, anything else that's come up in their committees, to agree the next steps of the work programme. So there is an opportunity to do that cross, fertilisation, so to speak, of those committees. So that should be picked up. Obviously, it's anything else that comes up that we need to understand where it's appropriate for that to go.
Trying to sum this up a little bit, otherwise we'll be talking around all evening. As the chair, I don't want to miss anything. I want to. This is here to scrutinise, so I need to put that down as a starter. But what we need to do is, as Councillor Tastrom, as chair, will come back and feed back into us. If we feel we need to look deeper into these things, we will. I promise you that. We're not. I don't think anybody's trying to sideline anything. We're trying to get the procedures right. So, and I understand where you're coming from. And it's maybe something I need to talk to officers about, and perhaps yourselves. But we need to get this off the ground, starting, and see how far we go. And if it's not doing what we hope it's doing, I need to know as chair. So do the rest of the councillors. So what I'm trying to say is we need to sum up where we're going with this before the next meeting. Are you as chair happy with a written report you can do at the moment and feed us back and say that you need more help or no help or whatever? Because they're the sort of things and I think we as councillors need to be saying that. If we're not, and it's not the officer's fault, it's the way it is, it's the way the council has been set up. We need to know if we're not coping with what doing committees, subcommittees. If it's not working, we need to know. But we also need to get on and do it. But if we put too much work in the beginning, we'll lose the emphasis of what we're doing. But I do accept we need to get it right. And even if it has to come back again at some stage, we'll do that. Sorry.
So if I may suggest that we amend these terms of reference to quarterly, add the fourth bullet point, which is to review of service areas of any issues of concern. And then I would suggest that we perhaps have two of the panels and then needed re-review the terms of reference at the beginning of the new municipal year.
Well, are we happy with that? And I'm looking round across the board. Yes. So yes, lovely. Thank you very much. Now I've got to find it on my Sorry, I beg your pardon. I'm leaving the...
Shall I introduce first? Or?
Yeah, sorry. It's all right. You should know me. Once I start talking, I can't stop.
So I'm just very briefly going to say that obviously this is the third time that it's come back to scrutiny. We've obviously taken away a number of comments from members and looked at those. Nadine will take you through the feedback to those queries that have been raised and how they've now been reflected in the scorecard. And as I mentioned earlier, these are going to Cabinet on the 11th of October for approval. So I'll hand over to Nadine.
Councillor Tustrom. Tustain, I'll get it right one.
That's okay, Chair. You can just call me Jackie if you prefer. Keep forgetting. I just wanted to point out, because on the comments, which have been very kindly put into these, there is one other. There's only the 10 of them, and the one that's more of a general comment isn't on the list. So just to make everybody aware of that in case they refer just to this. So that's between page 19 on the report. It was the first comment. It was noted some of the actuals are the same as the target. So it's more just making sure everyone's aware of that.
Yes, sorry, I was going to cover that when I spoke, but that's fine because it didn't kind of fit anywhere else. So what, as Sue has just said, what you've got in front of you is a copy of the 9.4 comments from the report, which basically go through in order in line with the scorecard. So it makes it much easier for us to discuss and agree the recommendations that go forward to Cabinet from tonight. So if it's all right with everyone, I'll just start with the fit for future on the extra sheet you've got, and then we'll take the conversation from there. So is everyone happy that actually what was addressed or what was raised in the FFA 01 is accurate and is okay now, and that we can agree that one?
Well, I'll open it up. Have we got any questions or anything we wish to raise?
On Fit for the Future.
Sorry?
So on Fit for the Future generally. On that whole area.
Yeah, on this one. So, we got fit for the future. That's the first item on the spreadsheet here. Is there any questions, anything being raised about those?
Okay.
No? Beg your pardon.
I did Tustain. You'll get there. I just realised it is under the Fit for the Future. I just wanted to ask a question about the end of year appraisal completions, because we had a target of 100%, and it was only down here. It says 5.3%. Which obviously is really bad, and that can have a potential detrimental effect on staff, etc. Thank you.
So as previously reported to committee, the appraisals have been done. It was the fact at the time of doing the actual performance indicators at year end, we were transferring to the new appraisal system. So they've now been put onto the new system, but at the time of actually the reporting period, they hadn't been put on the system, but they were completed.
So just on that point, what we should have here is a little asterisk that explains that, because that's sort of, when you look at that, it really stood out for me, and I thought, gosh, this is appalling. You know, so I wasn't raised the same point. So I think it in the report, it should have a little asterisk underneath that table bit there, just to say that and explain that to members.
I'm happy that we add that into the comments column.
Thank you. With regard to that point as well, why has our target gone down? So we were targeting 100% and now we're targeting less. Hang on a minute. Yeah, we were targeting 100% and now we're targeting 93%, 98%. Why are we not targeting 100% again?
I think the reduction in the target reflects that we don't always have 100% of staff in at that time, so it allows for, so if there's a long-term absence, for example, then that appraisal won't be carried out at that particular time. Obviously, it would be picked up later, but it just gives us that area.
Councillor James.
In relation to the FFCO6, if you could explain that, because when I asked who the Equality and Diversity Officer was, we didn't have one. And when I asked Julia, I asked her when did they meet, and they hadn't met for some very long time. Well, I think it was years, in fact. So if you could explain to me who the Equality and Diversity Officer is, when do they meet in relation to the members on that group, and what is that target there?
So, so for the council, I'm the executive lead for all things EDI. Jane Rawlins-Mateus obviously left the authority a couple of months ago, and our new officer starts in a few weeks' time. The EDI members group has been continuing to meet, so I'm not sure why you've been told it hasn't met. We've also had the replacement, which is the EDI forum, which again is now being wrapped up into, I think it's going into CEP, I think, I can't remember. So it has been meeting, but I'm happy to provide the committee afterwards of the next suite of dates in terms of when those panels meet.
Councillor Harvey.
Sue, can I just clarify? I'm a member of that panel. I met once with the other members and that's it. So either have I been kicked off it because of some reason, or has it met and simply I've not been invited to it? Because I was a member of it, I thought.
I will follow that up for you to find out why you weren't included.
Just asking what that is. What is that?
What does it indicate?
What does it indicate?
So there's a significant action plan around EDI, of which we obviously endeavour to do as much as we possibly can each year on that EDI action plan. So there was no baseline for previous years, but what we're saying is we should be setting an aspirational target of at least 95% of the actions on that action plan are progressed.
Before we move on to that, can I just confirm for records that what we're saying then is we're happy with everything that's in there as fit for the future? No further recommendations, that's what I meant.
We're doing on improving safety. Yep. ISD 01, reduction in antisocial behaviour. There's 2 points on this one. Number one, obviously, it's very difficult for the council to know exactly how much antisocial behaviour is going on because it's dependent on what's reported. And it also says that the target is actually to make sure the reduction is less than 18%. Which I'd have thought that should either be greater than or equal to 18% for that perspective. Although what I think would be a nicer way to read this would be a successful resolution in the sort of joint agency ASB cases to show that we're actually achieving things with joint agency work, because obviously you don't know what's going on out there because things don't get reported, but you do know about stuff that you're trying to get resolved. So I think that would just be a much, much better way to start monitoring ASB.
It's because I'm over here, that's, you're not used to it. I just wanted to just double check that actually the allowance that we've made further to previous comments before in relation to ISD 02, which is about local residents feeling safe. I think previously we had, I'm going to get this around the wrong way, I know, we had that they felt safe during the day. We've now added in, as requested, that feeling safe at night time or after 1 o'clock. Okay.
I think also when we previously discussed all of these particular indicators, they need to be indicators that obviously represent how the organisation is performing, and some of the things that we're talking about in terms of that joint working is actually monitored through a different process, which is why they're not on the corporate scorecard. So I think we've kind of been round this loop. I'm not expecting us to put any, I mean, we can obviously put the recommendation or the comment to Cabinet to say that, you know, it's important that you see perhaps some of the other indicators, but I wouldn't necessarily expect to see them as part of the corporate scorecard.
Sorry, Chair. So can I clarify? Because I'm just a bit confused because I read this as saying it's a reduction in antisocial behaviour and we want that reduction to be less than 18%. So says to me that we actually want to limit how much we reduce antisocial behaviour by, even if we look at it from that perspective. From that perspective, that sounds to me like that's the wrong way round. It could be down to wording. So it's just clarification, really. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, I think we've probably got the arrow the wrong way round. But as I say, I must echo the Chair's points that this is about our performance rather than anything that we do with, because obviously, as you know, ASB is a multifaceted beast, and we obviously do our own survey work and measurement with members of the public through the CSPO team, and that reflects our own data rather than the data that's gathered through the antisocial behaviour panels or the county work.
I'd like to ask you a question on antisocial behaviour. I assume we've got a definition of it, because antisocial behaviour is not criminal, and have we got a definition of what we call an antisocial behaviour? I don't know.
Yes. You're going to ask me what it is now. So basically, it is actions that cause alarm, harassment, or distress to others. So, yeah.
The reason I ask is sometimes people mix up antisocial behaviour with criminal behaviour, and that is two separate things.
Yeah, and I think that from our perspective as an authority, we're pretty clear about that. There's obviously a massive crossover, as you say, and that alludes obviously to the point that Councillor Tustain is making between what is dealt with by the police, what is dealt with by our officers, and the crossover between, and which is why we do our own data gathering for that.
Can I pick them up on ISE01, a number of homeless households with dependent children placed in bed and breakfast during the quarter? It says here 20, and the actual achieved was 14. The concern around that for me is, was it that they were in bed and breakfast for 4 weeks and 6 days? I'd want something a bit more around that. Because they could effectively be in there just 1 day less than the 6 weeks. And the other thing that historically is that out of area or is that in Basingstoke? So I'd want a definition as to whether that's in Basingstoke and Deane, or are those people being placed in Manchester or wherever, Southampton. So I think it's important that we're clear what we mean by that. So I think we need to know how many of those 14 people, how long were they in bed and breakfast for? Because it may be 2 days, but it could be almost the 6 weeks.
I will boldly represent Ms Randall here in her absence. Certainly ISE 01 is an absolute figure, Councillor, so it's number placed in, whether they're in for a day or whenever, so we obviously look to avoid that. So it's just those who are placed in the quarter. So that's a measure of just how many we put in. I appreciate your concern, but there's no time limit there, other than the fact that we just don't want to put them in it, which is why we actually count that. We certainly are, the vast majority of ours are in borough placement, yeah. Because that's where we have our own arrangements with landlords and hotels are within the borough. So I'm not aware that we have any out of borough placements at this point in time.
But I think it's important, and as part of this, I would want to know that. I mean, you're saying you think that, but I think it has to be a definite. And you're saying that the target says that it's for anything up to 6 weeks, but I would want to know, because I think it's important that we have an understanding of that. Is it that these people with children are in bed and breakfast for just one night? Or are they in bed and breakfast for 5 weeks, 6 days? and are they in Southampton? And so I think it's an important target to understand a bit more.
Yes.
Yeah, so I'm happy to take that away and make sure we update the definition in terms of what's actually here, and we'll ask the question about the practicality of putting an additional line in, but obviously we'll put that in as a recommendation for Cabinet.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of things. Bearing in mind this is the other corporate priorities, the corporate scorecard, if you like. Regeneration is becoming an important target or an important priority. There's nothing in here really covering regen. I think there should be. So that's one to take away to think about, I think, in terms of how you capture and where we capture regeneration or what you would capture. So that needs some thought, I think. Well, I'm looking at it in terms of the housing agenda. Is it going to be under this, or is it going to be purely under what's built? Yeah.
So there are a number of
Safety was the
indicators,
housing
obviously.
targets. That's the problem. All the housing stuff seems to be under improving safety.
So sorry, would you mind clarifying what it is that you think?
So one of the conversations we've been having, and this is to be discussed in other places, is what we understand to mean by regeneration. If regeneration is only going to be the physical things, so under the planning area and all the rest of it, it's just going to be out physical. Yeah, it's another housing bit. Yeah, exactly. So planning for the future. If all the regen stuff is about physical, that isn't regen. Regen's far more than just building something. And it's how we understand that. So it's going to become a corporate priority. It is a priority of the council. I'm just challenging what we understand by the word and how we capture the KPIs on it going forward, because I think we have to. If it's going to be a priority of the council, it shouldn't just be about bricks and mortar, because I think regeneration is far more than that. So can I pose the question and ask officers to go away and just think about that as to how we might look at it in the future? Regeneration could be health. It could be a number of things. Unless we know that, I don't think we've had that conversation yet. Just simply talking bricks and mortar isn't there. The other one to think about as well is just again, perhaps under the planning one and not here, but it's related to housing, is how many people have been through the system as applying to the authority for help and being turned down for help. Was that captured as a KPI? Should it be here? And if it isn't, is it captured somewhere else? Because that's important. How many people are applying for assistance from the council and then not getting it? Do we record that, and where is that recorded?
Sorry, I would just refute that in some ways, because if we have a statutory obligation to help people in that thing, so if we're turning people away, that's not a council performance issue, because we would always abide by our statutory responsibility.
So again, I guess the question is, where do we capture that information? So if we're saying we're meeting our statutory responsibility is one thing, but if we're actively turning people away, for whatever reason that might be, surely that data must be captured somewhere, and we must understand the circumstance that we are actually turning people away for whatever right reasons, right or the wrong way, I'm not suggesting. But surely that must be captured somewhere, shouldn't it? It's just not left.
So I think we've raised this at a previous round of this information, so it's not something that we would capture on the corporate scorecard, but it's certainly something that potentially could be captured within the service plan or the service area. So I will follow that up for you.
In relation to, there's two here, but the one in relation to ISEO4, new placements into private sector accommodation using the rent bond. I was wondering, why is the target 64? And then we actually placed, the actual placement was 79. So is there more budget for us to have a higher target? What does the budget for the rent bond allow us to do? And should we raise that target if we've already achieved 79? That's one of my questions. I've got a couple of others. Because, I mean, obviously it's a good thing, and if we can help more people, surely we should have a higher target. Yeah.
I don't think you get any disagreement.
No, and the other one is...
So until we have the information back...
Brilliant.
We'll come back to this committee.
And the other one is...
So obviously these will go as comments, questions, issues raised in terms of the paper that's going to Cabinet. But obviously the specific question you've just asked, I will circulate, or I'll ensure that an officer circulates a response to the committee members.
Can I ask in relation to, I think it's ISE 08, ensure minimum levels of rough sleeping are maintained. What does that actually mean, minimum levels? I think, I think we need to have a very clear what do we want to achieve there, minimum levels. I thought that when we had the Cabinet for Housing, what's his name? I can't remember his name. Robinson. He said that it was no rough sleepers. So is it that we should have no rough sleepers? It's a very vague, woolly.
Yeah, I think the issue there is that whilst we do our best to ensure that there are no rough sleepers on the streets, yeah, that is something we don't control. Yeah, so we know that we have an intervention at that point. So when we're notified of a rough sleeper, then we make an intervention through the CSPO team and the housing team to ensure that they're offered suitable accommodation and what, whatever that is for their needs. So I don't think we can ever. It's a bit like our 98% for staff appraisals. We can never achieve 100% of zero. Yeah. When we had the COVID pandemic, then basically people were literally physically taken off the streets. But that legislation doesn't apply any longer now. So for our situation, it's about ensuring that we work with people to get them off the streets.
Hang on.
Sorry, can I, so I think picking up your point is the terminology. So we're not trying to make sure we've got two people on the streets. What we're trying to say is we are trying to maintain the very positive performance that we have in terms of rough sleepers. So we'll think about how we can word that slightly differently, but obviously picking up the point that Rob's just said, there's no way that, we could aim to have zero, but actually the reality is that we're never going to achieve that target because there will always be some instances where, the situation arises where they are, we haven't had the intervention. So it's an appropriate target, but we just need to be able to make sure that we're not trying to ensure that there are some people rough sleeping.
Councillor Harvey.
But again, this just needs picking up, because if there is a clear Cabinet commitment that there will be no rough sleeping, and that was as clear as day commitment given.
It's in the paper.
That was the policy position established. If we're saying we can't achieve that, I respect that, but then you can't have the statement that says we are going to have no rough sleeping. You can't have it both ways. So someone's got to be right in that position. So if it's officers, that's fine. But if it's the Cabinet member, then with all due respect, that becomes the target, because the Cabinet member, political lead, has said we will not have any rough sleeping.
So if I may, then obviously you can choose as committee to make that as a recommendation to Cabinet to discuss.
I understand no one wants rough sleepers, no one wants to be homeless, so the target should be there. And if it fails, it's one of those you can't control, and I do accept what the officer's saying. But we need to have something there that's solid, and I believe perhaps we should be recommending that we have no rough sleepers. Full stop. When we got them, we know at the end of the day we failed, but the answer is there's not a lot we can do about it. We're doing our best.
No, because if the target then shows that we have rough sleepers, if we're saying we want no rough sleepers, and then you show there's 15, we have failed as a council, but then we have to do something about it, and then it's about a political decision to build another hostel or to do more supported housing or to do... So we would have to look at it and do something about it. That's then for us to look at, isn't it?
So I would give a different example. For example, if I took council tax, in an ideal world, we would want to collect 100% of council tax. But obviously, this is about trying to set a suite of indicators that we as a council and officers can actually perform to. So I appreciate what you're saying. In an ideal world, the council plan says we don't want any rough sleepers. but as officers operating within that policy, this is the indicators that we're working to. So, you know, it's not the intention to set the indicators up so that every year that we fail. So, you know, there is a balance between what is actually, you know, the reality in terms of performance, where we think that should be, and is that still acceptable? So you could be saying, well, do you know what, we'll never have more than 5 rough sleepers in the borough. There's a difference between the council plan and, you know, what the priorities we want to try and achieve and what we can actually achieve based on the resources that are allocated to officers to implement policy.
Hang on. I think what the councillors are trying to get to, what we want is the information, really, is if we've got rough sleepers, then as a council we should be either putting more money in or whatever from there. But if the indicators are showing that we're hitting a target, it's like to say we've hit a target, but there's still rough sleepers. It's catch-22 all the time, in my view. Councillor.
I just, forgive us, I mean, for me, it's just a really simple point. And I get what you're saying about the practicalities, I get all of that. But here is a policy the Cabinet set. They have gone out publicly and said to the residents of Basingstoke and Dean there will be no rough sleeping. Therefore, the target has to reflect that because that's what has been set. We're not saying out there to the residents, we're saying to you, no rough sleepers, but actually in our own corporate thing, we'll accept 2 because 2 is the target we've set ourselves privately. You can't have it like that. If the target policy is 0, then in those circumstances, because it's been openly proclamated as such, it's been out there and said as such, I think it has to be 0. And if we fail it, we fail it. But that's the test that others have set. That's the test Cabinet has chosen to set itself.
I am inclined to agree with Councillor Harvey, I think. I have to say, I think I'm perfectly content that the recommendation from Scrutiny be that the Cabinet member reconsider it and to leave it with them.
Thank you.
What we're saying as a committee, we want it as a recommendation that there will be no rough sleepers in Basingstoke. That will be the target. Is that what we agree? And then from then on, if there is, we can then actually go to the Cabinet there is, and they can either come back and do something about it or whatever. Yes? We agree with that? Right. Thank you.
Sorry, ISB 01. No, I'm wrong again. Wait a second. ISE 01. That's the one I was looking for. At the moment, it's less than or equal to 20. This year's target and also next year's target. But we've managed to hit 14. So why should we revisit the target in the light of that? Because I know that when we last looked at it, we didn't have this data that was all updated. So given that we've got 14, should we update it and have a better target, a more sensible one?
If that is what the committee wants, and I think it actually makes sense to me, if you hit a target, we always moan, in industry we moan the other way when we hit targets, they put the targets up so you can earn bonuses and whatever. But yes, we should make it, in my view, make targets high and try to achieve. Now, whether we do or not, we can look, but every year we should be looking at these targets, and that's why we're having the other committee to look at them deeply, more deeply than what we're doing even tonight. Not if the committee wishes that, I'm looking round, put that as a recommendation.
I mean, we hit 14. Hopefully, we can do better next year. But I would defer to other people's experience on that.
I would just be curious, because it's a quarterly target, whether there are seasonal trends, and actually whether 20 is a challenging target after Christmas, for example, but not so much a challenging target in summer. But I mean, that's something the Cabinet member can consider. I have no problem with us asking them to have a look at it.
I think I'm possibly making the same point, that if you look at an actual like that that's far below the target, you do need to understand if there have been exceptional circumstances. Because if you look at it simplistically and ignore something seasonal or very unusual, you end up with a target that's unrealistic. And in my experience, when a team of people are focused on a target, if the target becomes silly, you lose the focus because it's just understood that it's not realistic. So provided there's a caveat that exceptional circumstances are just asked about before you drop a target significantly.
It's quite a variation.
Well, I would actually agree with you. If the targets become too big and too cumbersome, people do not go for their targets, whether we like it or not. That's a fact of life. But what we got to is trying to achieve the best. Now, whether we need to look at this in a year's time and say these targets are being met, should we have a better target? That is, as a committee, I think that is a reasonable approach. But I don't know. There's an officer, no, sorry. Councillor.
Surely this is a piece of work that we could ask Jackie and the panel to look at, isn't it? You know, this would be an example. These are the, you know, because they're going to meet more often, they can do these more detailed pieces of work around this.
Yeah, Chair, I think with this, actually, there's quite a few factors, which I think ties in with what Councillor James is just saying, because I was speaking to Vivid COO, and he was talking about, you know, they're worried about people becoming homeless because of the cost of living crisis. So we could see a surge. So there's all these external factors that may well impact that figure, and that figure could sadly, the 20 might be actually a very challenging target this coming winter. So I think we need to understand the housing figures behind it and where it goes, and I think that also ties in with the placements into the private rented sector, etc. So all of that housing area, I think there's lots of factors which I think, yes, would be a good one to look at in a bit more depth to get a complete picture.
So actually the committee wants to complete a work programme request, obviously identifying what it is they want to scrutinise, and officers can obviously do that.
If that's something as a committee we would like to do, we can put that forward as well.
Somebody needs to take the responsibility to do the work programme request.
Did you hear that?
So obviously officers still need to understand what it is you want to
Yeah, we need to-
scrutinise.
Yeah. What we actually want from this.
And then sorry, rather than doing a pick and mix this evening, let the panel help us here by identifying the bits, as Jackie just quite eloquently said.
So my suggestion obviously is we bring the monitoring to the January meeting. Obviously you have a look through the performance indicators and obviously identify via that activity what it is that you want to have a closer look at.
So I think, yeah, I do need some guidance as to exactly what people want to look at. I mean, I've just said, obviously, we've got issues around the whole housing and what's going to happen through the winter and how those figures go. But it's obviously this committee looking for me to come back with revised targets or looking for some detailed scrutiny. And I think that's what Sue's referring to. Is that right?
Yeah, so from an officer point of view, we just need to understand what it is you want to scrutinise. So if as a committee you want to let us know what that is, then obviously we can ensure that that's what we bring. If you want that to come to the January panel, then obviously outside of the committee meeting you can obviously submit the information that you want us to look at.
Yeah. Councillor Harvey.
No, say, yeah, just constructively then, in terms of the panel, I mean, what would be helpful is we don't know the answer to the question about the 20 figure. We don't know why the 14 stands out on the 20s, as everyone has quite rightly said. So that needs to be looked at. And then if it comes back here because of that, then so that's the right thing. And then also you've raised quite rightly the point about the issues to do with rent and private sector and so on. So that block just is worth examining. the panel able to identify why the things are the way they are there,
Yeah.
understand that, and then if there are things that fall out of that that are worthy of deeper scrutiny, comes back here, or if the questions are answered and the report comes back is, we've answered those questions, at least that piece of work's been done then.
What I would recommend then is that obviously we answer the specific question that has been asked around, so Councillor James's question in terms of how many, days, weeks, whatever does that makes up that number. What, is it seasonal? How is that actually impacted? Why is the target 20? With a recommendation obviously to Cabinet and to the portfolio holder for that to be reviewed. Obviously we can take away a question back to the appropriate officers to see what other information they hold, and we can circulate that to the committee. And then obviously that will help inform the discussion that you have at performance panel in terms of anything else that you specifically want to look at.
So,
A budget around the rent deposit, and, can we extend that target? Because obviously and the other one is in relation to out of area. Yeah.
Sorry, Chair. That was me saying we'd go home early, and I'm one of the worst. PEA 06, I'm not sure, again, it's clarification. We're talking about a reduction in council operational emissions, and we've set a target to make sure we don't exceed 15%. Because it's less than or equal to, that should be greater than or equal to 15%.
I can take that one. I guess that was reflective of and noting comments about different committees and the fact that actually there's a lot more detail that goes to CEP annually on this, sets out quite kind of a more detail behind it. That was reflective of the different ways we can report on our operational emissions and the kind of, I guess, the lumpy nature sometimes of the interventions we make, how they can have quite significant reductions as a result of certain projects and less so. So that was reflecting it based on some, our kind of analysis of interventions we're looking at making this year. 15% looks like a realistic based on our net emissions, less than if you look at it slightly differently. So that's where that number comes from, if that makes sense.
So to clarify, are we saying it's? Oh, sorry.
Yes, the target should be greater than or equal to 15%. You're looking to achieve a reduction of at least.
Yeah, so we could take that
So
away.
it should be greater than equal, not
I
less
guess
than.
the narrative at CEP probably explains a bit more of it, but yeah, we could take that away.
Thank you, Chair. Just on the first three lines, all relating to household waste recycled, I'm just interested, we've got the amalgamated target and then the actual broken down, and then again you go to the target for the future year. On garden waste, we're increasing the target to, you know where I'm going with this, we're increasing the target to 9%. We haven't had a garden waste service this year at all in any shape or form or description that residents would recognise. But the comment is, we are advertising for new customers to join the service, which will increase the amount recycled. Somehow we've got to capture the issue, have we not? And I don't know whether because you're setting yourself up to fail without even start. We want a 9% increase on the amount of household waste recycled by garden waste, and we actually haven't got a service. So somehow, somewhere, someone's got to capture that point, I think. And separately to that, are we saying that that is a percentage of what? Increase in household waste recycled dry, is that an increase in tonnage? What's the 15% of 15% of? Well, I just need to get my head around that if I can. Forgive me, I might have already asked the question before and,
We'll take that away. I believe it's a 15% increase on previous, but I will get that circulated with the housing stuff as well.
But is it 15% increase of, because if it's an increase on the tonnage, that's ludicrous, because it should be the target to decrease. We want the decrease in the tonnage of waste we create, don't we? That's the thing. I'm just trying to understand what it is that we're driving at. And then there are two indicators that aren't here that I think should be. which relate to fly tipping. There is no KPI in the corporate on the volume of fly tip or the number of fly tip. And I just think that if it's captured, great. And if it is, it's because it's a priority. I think it should be in this corporate because it's such an issue.
I would just suggest that you make that as a comment to committee.
We'll make that as a... I just wonder whether it sits below these KPIs somewhere, but most probably does. How many households are we actually having garden waste collected? Because it's a voluntary system, they have to pay. It's actually gone through the roof in real terms. And I do wonder, you know, we're talking in percentage terms, but how many households are in the borough are actually out of the total, how many we got?
So that is a KPI that sits below this, but within the
That's what I
service,
wondered.
in the service plan.
Councillor James, sorry.
Sorry, do you want to?
Sorry, Councillor Tuck, from over there, Councillor.
Oh, thank you. I was slightly moving down the list. I don't know if I'm jumping ahead of that one. I wanted to talk about water. You're above. You go first then.
So mine was on the first one in relation to the dry waste. It says in the comment, it says based on it's as a reducing contamination of bins. I would like to see as a KPI how many contaminated bins do we have within the borough. So, for example, within Norden, there's quite often in relation to all the flatted accommodation a contaminated bin. I know there are also households as well. So I would like to know as a KPI what we're talking about. You know, what does that actually look like? So in relation to the town centre, you have lots of flats within the town centre. In relation to their waste, how many of those bins are contaminated? And then they don't get emptied because they're contaminated. So we do need to have an understanding of the quantum of that, because it's a significant issue.
We can put that through as a recommendation if committees. Yes, yeah.
If you're ready to head down the list towards water, and that's I know it's actually on this second page. I'd asked about looking at a measure that focused on water quality, and the reply was that it's in the AMR. But the AMR, of course, refers to the Environment Agency monitoring now on a triennial basis. And of course, that's not what our local plan requires. So EM6 in the local plan will tell you that the status of the water environment is monitored as part of the river basin management plans and the EA's annual monitoring process, the results of which will be reported through the council's annual monitoring. So I do think we've got a sort of inconsistency here, and I do think it's very important we're measuring water quality annually. It's under protecting and enhancing our environment, but it's on the second page. Sorry.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So the thing that's really important is that our actual KPIs that are in the scorecard are things that we have monitoring and management of, or a statutory role in relation to. And the issue with respect to water quality is that that's the Environment Agency's role. It's actually not the Planning Authority's role or the local authority's role to go around and undertake water quality monitoring across the borough. And what we do in our authority monitoring report on an annual basis is we bring into that report what the outcome has been of the Environment Agency's monitoring, which is actually the exact data that we present in the authority monitoring report. We don't represent that we've collected that data. The local plan policy that you refer to was a requirement, or was in there because there was a connection between the Environment Agency's requirement, at that time, and they have stopped doing that monitoring in the way in which, it was thought of at the time when that policy was, adopted as part of the local plan. And we as an authority don't have any control or ability to say to the Environment Agency, no, you must do this on an annual basis in our borough. So I can't provide, the executive with some advice that there's a KPI that I could put in there, deliver, monitor and provide you data on, okay, because it's out of our control. So the KPIs that I've got in here are things that we can give you factual answers on and monitor and actually have real data on. So that's why there's nothing on water quality. It's not to say it's not really important, because it is, which is why we've got it in our proposed policies and our existing policies, but it is to say it's not something I can monitor and control.
Thank you for that response. I hear what you're saying and the difficulty of your predicament. However, our local plan is what's been through the planning inspector. And I don't think it's acceptable because a partner has decided they are going to fail on their collecting the refuse in a timely way. I mean, whichever your partner is, either you hold your partner to the line or you'd have to fill the gap yourself. I mean, I don't understand how we can selectively use. And as a borough with many chalk streams and rivers, I'd have thought the quality and health of our water environment was absolutely critical. And even if I move from our enhancing the environment, which is where these little snippets are taken from, is improving river and landscape quality. We have put nothing in about improving river and landscape quality. I mean, what is it up? We could do some fantastic things for nature and biodiversity, and we're not even willing to measure it. And I would like to ask, from the aspect of the Environment Agency's triennial been turned off, the Piatt's Hill Bridge one was removed. And as far as I know, we are reliant on Thames Water's downstream of the sewage treatment work monitoring. Now, I don't know about you, but I do not want to be by monitoring and all the rest of it. You know, we are going to look unbelievably foolish. And I just can't believe that we would set ourselves up to fail like that. We need to either get the Environment Agency in and say, please do something better around here. This is a highly sensitive chalk stream. All of our chalk.
Is there a recommendation you want to put forward that we can put to the committee? Because we are recommending, whether it's picked up remains to be seen, but at least if we recommend something, we can take the fight forward if that's what you feel like. So if you would like to recommend, I think you most probably get support on this one across the board. But
I'd like to, Chair, I'd like to recommend that the Cabinet, if they cannot persuade the Environment Agency to monitor on an annual basis, that we instigate monitoring ourselves.
I'm on becoming zero carbon, is that? Sorry? I'm on becoming zero carbon. Are we okay to talk about that one? PEB06. So I suppose I was wanting to understand that. So is it, that's not this building, is it buildings that we rent out? Is that community buildings? What is that? That's my first question.
Yeah, I think you're happy to address. So that's our kind of operational buildings that are included in our operational carbon footprints. That's things like the core to, I guess, our operations, so depots, that kind of thing, as opposed to buildings that are tenanted, like community buildings.
I'd like to see, there isn't anything in there about, and I declare an interest here in that I'm a chair of a community centre, but I'd like to see something in here about buildings that are not ones that are our buildings, like community centres, community buildings or other buildings that we own. And I'd like to see something in there about solar panels and what we're going to do around making them energy efficient. So from the community centre that I chair, what are we going to do? There is no grant at the moment to put the solar panels on the roof. So we need to have a target that we're going to start to implement those solar panels throughout those buildings.
So sorry, are you making a recommendation to Cabinet that you wish to consider having solar panels put on all the community buildings?
Community buildings, it's the buildings that we have responsibility for.
So yeah, so you want them to consider solar panels?
Yes.
Good recommendation, but I think we ought to, from my perspective, we ought to make it clear that we believe our community buildings should come first. I think that's a big issue. That's just me as a councillor. And then the other buildings, yes, we all want it all done, but what I don't want to do is get lost in the property services for these big buildings we do own. I'm more concerned with the community buildings. Hannah, so.
So I was under the impression surveys were being done on a more holistic energy basis of those buildings. I am a little bit nervous of tying down to solar panels, just because like some of them won't see that much sun, for example, but having a target that was focused on improving I don't know, environmental sustainability of community buildings, I could get behind. But I just think solar panels, we might actually miss out on some opportunities potentially if we limit it to that.
Actually, on solar panels for a start need light, not sun. That's something that's important to note. But however, what I was going to say as well, and making sure, which actually ties in, because I know I've had people come to me for my county council grants for LED lights and things, making sure that we are implementing insulation and low energy lighting, etc., and actually have the council looking at supporting community centres with that as well, which obviously will reduce bills, their running costs, and mean that they will be more sustainable, which I think ties in what Councillor Golding's saying as well. So an actual overall look at making sure that our bill, and I think that is part of the energy audit anyway, isn't it?
So I think obviously you can make other recommendations from committee to Cabinet linked to these conversations. Obviously they're not necessarily going to be KPIs within the corporate scorecard. They will, if there's something that's implemented, they'd monitor that as part of the service or part of the climate change action plan, etc. So obviously you can make a recommendation to Cabinet to make sure that they consider that issue.
Yeah. If we're going to make a recommendation, I don't think, well, I don't assume there's many people going to actually oppose it, but I will accept that that's what we're going to do, but we've got to get through these KPIs. We're seeing, these things are all good, don't get me wrong, I don't want to lose them, but if we're not careful, we're losing where we're going on this paper with the KPIs, because it's not a KPI we're talking about. We're talking about things, actually, we've talked about over the years from our perspective, community building. So if there's a recommendation, we'll take this, and then I think we've got to start looking at the KPIs and get through this. Otherwise, I think we could be here till midnight, because there's lots out there we all feel strongly from all sides about. So, yeah. Okay.
Back on a KPI, sorry, yes, you're right, we are diverse, going for a bit of a tangent. But the trees is talking about an increase in number of trees, but I know certainly when I've spoken to tree officers, they work on a canopy cover. Now obviously we lose trees, so just planting more trees could mean we could be making a net gain or a loss. So in actual fact, the canopy cover, which is something that officers work with, would seem to me to be a much more sensible measure.
Coming on that as well, but I'm just going to go back to becoming zero carbon, which is a KPI, so it's under that section. If we truly want to become zero carbon by 2025, we're going to have to expand our offer, and we have to look at further and stretch KPIs. We have, in relation to urban community centres, we have several that have solar panels. there are some that don't. So we need to make sure that that is a target, that we have those that don't have it do have solar panels. There are lots of other things they should have as well, but that's a simple win, isn't it?
Just a specific time. You're asking.
I'm
Sorry,
asking for a target there.
Sorry, if I just come in very quickly. Obviously, that's not a current policy. So it's not a policy that's been approved by council. So we can't set KPIs against something that we as officers aren't implementing, because obviously we implement the policies and the decisions of council and cabinet. So if I can I'll hand over to Ruth or Sam.
Yeah, it was just to quickly confirm as well for the council's carbon neutrality target for 2025 operationally. So that includes those, I guess, operational buildings, as I said, that are included already in PEB 05 and 06 there. Outwith of that is those buildings that are tenanted by other operators, including community buildings. So they're not strictly in that carbon neutrality 2025 target. So although you might want to make a recommendation about that outwith, they're not currently in that net zero 2025 category.
Can I make a recommendation then? Can I make a recommendation then that in terms of community buildings, because we could specify, we can go beyond that, but just we're in that envelope at the moment, that we collect the comments that the committee have shared this evening on a variety of sources of energy. So that's been picked up, the sustainability points, and that's fed into the work that you're doing, and that if we've declared a climate change emergency, yes, it's right that we're looking at the operational estate of the authority, but those other elements, such as community centres, should also be considered, and we should make a recommendation that should become part of your targets, part of what you're doing, to take that away to look at. Maybe that's the cabinet to approve of that, of course, but I thought they should have done, and I'm surprised they're not. I guess they've got to start somewhere, but I'd be surprised we would forget our community centres in that regard, because they're important buildings we own. But yeah, I mean, I get it, but can we make a recommendation to at least push that point?
Right. So what, as a committee, what are we saying we want?
There should be a target for our community centres.
Target for the future?
Yeah.
Future target.
We've declared a climate emergency. We're tackling our existing estate.
Climate emergency, so therefore we're talking about solar
panels. Solar panels.
Hang on. So hang on, Paul. Sorry. Yeah, we're cross. Sorry. We're talking about solar panels and being sustainable with our community buildings and everything else. That's a recommendation. Are we in agreement with that?
Sorry, can I just...
Sorry.
Sorry, I'm not clear. I'm not clear what the recommendation is. Sorry, is it right if Councillor Harvey just clarifies?
I would like us to have a target whereby we look at our community buildings, our community centres, so that we are able to set a target for them to have solar panels and other means, because it's not just that, but that we push that target for them to have that, and that we have the sustainability points that were picked up by others as well, because you've raised a point about sustainability in the building itself, and that is examined as a target, so that we push the point to the climate change emergency that we have all declared and agreed, and that they become a clear target for us.
Councillor Mackay.
Yeah, just a reminder that we also have a target to be a net zero borough by 2030.
Yeah.
So if something is out with the definition for 2025, anything that's written up or any definition that's given to what's going to happen after 2025 or buildings outside of the definition of 25 is nevertheless got to be at a certain point by 2030.
Yeah, completely agree.
Sir James.
Canopy one, I support what Jackie is saying. I think it's, in relation to the target, you're talking about 400 trees. If you look at the canopy target in relation to the green infrastructure strategy, when you look at each ward, it has to be 20% in relation to that green infrastructure strategy, and many of the wards fall short of that. I think Norden in 2018, I think it was, and I'm not sure when it's been measured since then, was 14.5. So some wards are well below what it should be. So I think the target needs to reflect the canopy definition and what relates to our green infrastructure strategy, and there is a national measurement for each ward, and so you need to look at your ward. I've got the measurements as to what they were before, so we need to be able to do that, and I think it's really important that it is ward related as a canopy cover, not just canopy cover. So some wards, you'll be surprised, have a lot more than others, so so we need to look at the wards. So when you're going to plant those 400, when you're going to plant those 400 trees, you could suddenly just decide, oh, we're just going to put them here in the forest or something. Whereas the definition, we need to really look at lifting up so that all wards meet the 20% canopy cover.
That is a recommendation, that we do it in wards, that we reach a target so we know where it is failing. There might be reasons for that, but what we want to know as a scrutiny, why it's failing. Might not have the room to put things in, but at least if we know, we can take it forward. Is that what we're saying? Sorry.
I think also the point that was made earlier about it being a net increase is very important, because as part of the regen, the proposal is we cut down 100 trees. So it's very important that we get bigger as a whole.
Councillor, thank you for your point. I'd just like to raise a word of caution here. The issue that we have with regard to whether we have a net 400 extra trees across the borough is not a simple one. If we have another Storm Arwen, we could lose 300 trees. Yep. Quite easily. We've got a storm coming in tomorrow, 50-mile-an-hour winds, trees are in full leaf. I'm predicting we'll lose a number of trees tomorrow. If we set ourselves a net target for that, that's great, but we could end up having to plant 1,000 trees across the borough to achieve your 400 net. Well, it's great, but where do you want your trees? Because I know full well, and so does Susan here as the chair of NET, the National Environment team, that we get an awful lot of complaints about trees. Everybody likes a tree until it's at the end of their garden, shading their patch, their garden, threatening to blow over onto their outhouse or their wall. Yeah, I'm just stressing to you that if you want a target of net 400, which seems to where you're going, yeah, that has significant cost implications and significant logistical ones, yeah, which...
Rob, if I may, I think it's fine for the committee to make the recommendation, and obviously we can, as officers, provide information to Cabinet.
You know, obviously if it's a recommendation that goes forward, then, yeah.
I do understand where you're coming from, because in one of my wards, I had the same problem. The wrong trees were planted. That sounds silly, but it was. We have forest trees, which I used to represent was buckskin. We wanted them out because they're no good, but people wanted decent trees, which should be in there. But as you say, there's a recommendation out there. The officers will come back and give their viewpoint, and we as a committee...
We won't come back and give a viewpoint.
Well, we can...
recommendations to Cabinet.
Yeah, yeah. The point is, we will then have to decide where we go as a committee, whether we want to push it or whatever. Okay.
I would hope that this committee would look at the actual performance on a target in the future, and if for some reason it had fallen short, like the exceptional circumstances of Storm Arwen, then that would be accepted as a reason for falling short on the target, rather than the reason not to set a more challenging target.
Councillor James.
We've already got, if you look at the green infrastructure, priority 13, it's very clear, and it also is a national requirement in relation to 30, it's another document, in relation to 20% urban cover of trees. So it's there, that's what I'm saying about other KPIs in other policies, and we're missing some of these. So it's there, but what I'm saying is, for example, if we then look at wards, Winkleberry, look at your own ward, Southam is 15.1, so you're very low down, but it doesn't mean they have to be in urban, so in Norden, we could have it in business estate areas, or we just managed to get 200 trees from county planted in Norden, and we worked with county to do that. So it is possible to do it. And in relation to climate change, if it's going to cost this borough more, so be it. I think that the target should be net.
I don't think there's a disagreement in that in real terms. It's not as simple as we make out. I do accept that, but there is ways forward, and as we've always done in this borough, we look at things, some things go through, some things don't. But at the end of the day, if we're recommending that, we can take, when it does, the Cabinet looks at it, they may say, we'll be looking at it, and then we can take it further. That, I think we've sort of gone over that enough, if I'm honest with you, on no disrespect, but we can go, you know, I could go through my ward and someone else's ward. We're not really here to do that, I know, sad as it sounds, but we need to move on a little bit.
The number of community events supported, I don't really understand what it's or how you measure it, or because what are we supporting them? We're giving them finance or officer support or publicity. I'd like to see that defined more carefully, because I think it's a really important function of the council.
I can circulate that after. I've got a document from Daniel to share that.
Just a quick one. I'm guessing the survey not conducted to the top one is because of COVID, not because of anything else. The survey that was not conducted on the top one on that page is because of COVID, I'm guessing, rather than anything else.
No, the resident survey is not carried out each year. Because council approved a cut in the budget.
Sorry, excuse my ignorance, I don't understand the traffic lights in PFB 07, 08, 09, 010.
Again, I think we have tried to explain this before. This is linked to how programmes are monitored. So this is the actual RAG status of the overall delivery of the programme. But we will add that into the notes so that it's actually more transparent.
More a comment than anything. I have concerns if we've got the Leisure Park programme overview as currently at red, and then turning that around to green. I'm very hopeful that we see that, because that's obviously a huge leap from a programme management perspective.
So you'll be pleased to know that coming to performance panel is the summary updates on all of the programmes, so you'll be able to see it there as well.
The PFD09, number of businesses engaged and or supported. Same question with that, please. I'm guessing that you have a document, so it'd be brilliant to see it. Thank you.
I do, and yes, I'll share it.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you. PFCO1, a total number of new homes delivered. I mean, of anything, I would say that's totally out of the control of officers. So I don't know why we're monitoring that here if we're happy with not monitoring water. It would be great also to understand a breakdown of the rating. What I was really keen to see, less the number of the homes, because we know that's in the local plan and we know what that is. And the developers will develop when they want to develop. But in terms of quality, I'm a total novice, don't know anything about this, but a quick search was looking at EPC on construction or new build is a building reg stat, and they have to provide that EPC rating. It's done from plans, so I don't know how accurate it is. But surely we should at least know to what spec developers are building new properties, and that should certainly be measured as some sort of KPI. And the second question related is the government's Future Homes Standard is coming in 2025. And this is a set of standards that will complement the building regs to ensure new homes are subject to higher energy standards. How can we track, monitor, put that in so that we really are looking at what the title says, which is well-designed, well-built, good quality homes, please?
So I'm just going to unpack a little bit of this, but it might not all be for this committee, so I'll take Sue's sort of guidance on some of this. In relation to building regs, there have been changes that have been brought into effect in June of this year. And those changes will be leading to all, so homes that are being completed that have building regulations from June this year going forward will be meeting a higher standard. And then the new building regs that come in 2025 are even going to be more challenging, which is what they should be, but more challenging to achieve the quality of home target that you're talking about. So we listened to your previous scrutiny meeting before coming here tonight, and I was aware that this is a real concern for you all. And we've been thinking it through as a team as to how we could even give you data, because this is the point, isn't it? Around, it has to be something I can monitor to report on. It has to be a KPI that we have got an ability to find information for you on. And one of the things that we do know is we do know as an authority when we have a new address point, because we do create address points, obviously, whether it's through street name and numbering or through the rates system. But what I can't give you certainty on is that new home, the time frame in which they have to register the EPC certificate for its creation and how long that takes to go onto the system to be able to say to you in the previous quarter or year how many of those new homes EPC certificates indicate they're a B or a C or maybe even an A, let's be ambitious. We can't actually give you the certainty that of the new homes delivered, so in the last year, 1,400, how many of those have got their EPC? Have I got 1,400 EPC certificates to report on? Do you understand what I'm saying? So it's a skewed set of data. So that makes it a really hard EPC for us, I'd say, in the next 12 months or even 24 months to be reporting on. But it is something we'd like to get a handle on and understand, and I'm sure there's lots of authorities across the country that would like to as well. But I haven't got any control on the speed of registration of EPC. So technical question, liked having it, but I can't actually monitor the data to give you a set of sound information for you to, do you know what I mean, to use as part of a scorecard. But we can explore that in years to come.
sorry, PFC03, in relation to total number of new affordable homes built or completed. I know that's the overall figure. Do you not, as a committee, I know this is in the annual monitoring report that goes to EPH, but do you not want to see some breakdown of what they are? So in relation to, are they flats? I mean, I think there's an assumption here we're talking about a house, but a home is many things. And as a scrutiny committee, don't you want to have an understanding of what that looks like? I personally would, because I have concerns about the number of flats that are being built for people that are living in affordable housing, like housing families in flats. So I personally would like to see that have some more substance and detail to it.
We're happy with that? Sorry.
Oh, sorry, it was a separate question.
I've got a,
Oh, sorry.
just a quick question. Can I be reminded what's the target for affordable homes that we're supposed to build? No, as a percentage, sorry, Ruth.
Well, could someone get out a calculator and figure out what 300 is against 850?
It's about, I just did, I think it was about 34%. Is that actually the target that we're expected to do? Or, because
Well, the policy is 40%.
40%.
Yeah.
Just to be clear what we're saying here, the target per site, or the overall target, is 40%, as I understand it. The 300 is an arbitrary 300 rather than the percentage of anything. So if it's 300 of the 880 and it's 34%, but it should be 40%, that's one thing. But I don't think we're saying that. I think it's 300 arbitrarily just as a figure that's set in the strategy, rather than 40% per site or per overall. It's per year. Yeah, it's annual figure, isn't it? 300 annually.
It's an annual figure.
So if the figure's gone up to 880, for argument's sake, and the figure is still 300, a comment would be that we aren't, again, the percentage of affordable housing as compared to the number of houses we're supposed to build is falling. The target goes to 880, but the figure stays at 300.
So obviously it depends on what homes are being delivered against a particular planning application in any period of time. So it might well be that actually the affordable homes for a particular development might have been delivered last year. So they're not comparable.
The recommendation should be that if the overall house, if the first figure, total number of homes delivered in the year, goes up to 880, then there has to be a correlation to the affordable number of units. Because if there isn't, yet the first figure is consistently increasing, we're not seeing an increase in the number of affordable homes because arbitrarily we've just capped it at 300 per year. So someone somewhere just needs to think that through in terms of perhaps what it should be.
So what we're asking for a KPI that gives us
I don't
figure.
think we're asking for
Can I just check with Laura's suggestion about breakdown for the new affordable homes? It's important that we get the breakdown right so that we bring out the point which I think is really important, that we shouldn't be building lots of flats for families. And so I think the breakdown needs to be the size of the flat, the size of the flats. So you've got some are 2-bed, 4-person, some are 1-bed, 1-person. I think we do capture that data, and I think it's really helpful to see it.
So I think there's a difference here between the KPI that we're trying to capture for the corporate scorecard and other information that you want to be collated. So we can take a note away to say that you'd like to see that breakdown, and we can get that circulated to the committee.
I'll ask the question. Some of this should surely have been going through the what I call the Housing Committee, EPH. Hang on. Is that some of these questions are coming up there or not?
So I would imagine that a lot of the supporting information, particularly around housing, which obviously the annual report's coming back anyway to scrutiny in January possibly now, but like the climate change stuff, etc., it's all included in the strategy information. So, and obviously there's a lot of information, as was previously said, that sit in the service plans that sit below this. So it's a case of, we're not duplicating it at the corporate level because they're actually being captured at a lower level.
So I was just saying, it's in the annual monitoring report that goes to EPH. You get the housing strategy that comes here. I'm just reminding you, I suppose, this is my opportunity because each time I raise this, it doesn't go anywhere. But I'm just reminding you that of those units we're building, a large percentage of them are flats. And when you had the housing strategy come last time, you didn't say that you weren't happy. When you were asked, were you happy with this? And did you want to, it's a housing allocation policy that you came here. You can change that housing allocation policy as a scrutiny committee, but you didn't. So I'm asking you again, please look at your housing allocation policy, because we don't need to be housing families in flats. And I'm asking you again, when it comes again, which it will be coming soon because it comes annually, that's your opportunity to please look at it again. I raise it in every committee that I'm in. I'm raising it again for you.
Laura, I think I would agree with you. No, I agree with you. It's one of my pet things. And I think people here are saying the self-same thing. So when it does come, it's something we can raise, and perhaps we can raise it now to break it down when it does come, or do we
Well, no, we've just taken an action
to
circulate that information.
take that information? But it is a good point. But I think we need to move on. I'm not being rude, but we can debate a lot of this stuff, and it's not what we're here for at the moment. If we were, I'd be joining in with where you're going. So
I shall move us on. The last one on the page, achieved or not achieved doesn't feel like a massively useful target to me. Sorry, team. I know you're doing lots in the background, but technically you could have one meeting with them a year and say, well, I've achieved my target, which isn't massively convincing for me. I'm happy to take comments on it, though.
Something about what's in our control and what's not in our control, and this one is with us working with partners, and we want to achieve that, and we do meet with them a lot more than once a year, but I appreciate your comment.
Chair, this is possibly a bit random, but I do think this is really important for our residents, and I don't know where it best sits, but it's just on the bin collections. Shouldn't there be a KPI that says percentage bins collected on time, black bin, green bin? Because that's taking up 75% of our call centre time. If we could get that right, they'd have loads of time to do other stuff. And I just feel it's the only thing that I think our residents just expect us to get on and do. And I know we're not doing very well on that at the moment, and I know we'll point to partners, but actually that is something we need to step up and deal with.
I was involved when they done the contract on this, and I was not a happy bunny. But I think we need. It's the one thing we are responsible for is collecting waste and clearing our paths, and it would be a good recommendation to put forward if we could follow that. But as I say, can we pick that up?
I've noted it.
Yeah.
So hopefully between all of us, we can note all these recommendations.
Right.
I just want to pick up the point about, on the sheet, protecting and enhancing our environment. The one we didn't talk about is the EV charging points. Because when I asked the question, the response that came back is, we will be able to report on the number of EV charging points installed in the borough. Fine, that's great. But I'd like a record, if there's possible, because if there are charging points, of the ones that work and the ones that don't work. because we will know if they work or they don't work, because surely we should know if they're on our land, they're our charging points, like they're in the Parklands car park or in the Feathers Yard. And it's just great we've got them and we've got the number of them, but surely we should know across the year if they're working or not working. It is an issue.
I would agree, and I would like to see them on our estates as well. But if we can put that forward as a recommendation to find out what are actually working and what isn't, that would be a good way forward. And there might be good reasons why they're not working, I don't know. But if we don't ask, we won't get. So. If it was left to the chair, I would have been saying, well, you know what you asked for, carry on, because I got lost after about 10, 15 minutes, if I'm really honest with you.
If there's anything obvious, just shout. So on Fit for the Future, we've had an action to circulate some information on the dates around the EDI working groups and the steering group. We are looking to amend the reduction percentage in antisocial behaviour. The arrow is round the wrong way, and note in the end of year appraisals, add in the completions and a note to explain why that one looks so low. So I'm just trying to read my own handwriting. In terms of the number of homeless households with dependent children placed in B&B during the year, there's a recommendation to actually increase or amend the target, so reduce the target in line with the previous year's actuals. There's a request to understand how many of those are in and out of the borough. There's a request to understand the total number of days that equates to in terms of, rather than just the actual number of instances. A request to understand the budget information around private sector rented rent bonds, and as to whether how many rent bonds the budget could potentially support, and is there any possibility of increase in the indicator. A recommendation to reduce the rough sleeping indicator to 0. An understanding if there is a seasonal reason for why there is 20 numbers of homeless households and it hasn't been reduced. To look at the work planning request around what might the housing request be in terms of further information to be looked at through the performance panel. Any from Julia or Nadine that I've missed? So, just have a look at this one. Am I doing them out of order? Yeah, let's have a look. So, pretty sure I've got them all. Right, so protecting and enhancing our environment. A request to have some information around fly tipping in terms of the tonnage and the actual number of instances. The request to understand the percentage of contaminated bins and recommendations around that. So to around the garden waste, to include a comment around the potential achievability of the current target, based on the fact that there has been no service. So we will note that point, that the climate change strategy, the operational emissions should be greater than or equal to, not less than or equal to 15%. Nadine, I also note that in the comments we actually refer to an officer's name, if we can take that out, please. Under the energy audits, further information, I've got a whole raft of notes here, so I'm not going to try and read them all out, but around the actual community buildings, understanding the sustainable energy direction of travel, what that's going to look like, having some key targets around it, and how that's going to be monitored.
Go back to the one on contaminated waste. So it was also, it was around the tonnage, but it was also the number of bins that are contaminated.
Yep, okay. Yep. So a recommendation that if the Environment Agency are not monitoring our water quality on an annual basis, that we should be looking at how we can do that as an authority ourselves to ensure that we have that information. And to include a recommendation on a waste KPI around collections and misbins, etc. So that's all the ones I've got on that one. Any from Julia or Nadine? It's getting easier now, there's less of the next ones. Strengthening communities, so obviously there's...
The trees.
Trees, canopy.
Oh, hang on a second. Yes, so apologies. A recommendation that rather than having the, if we do keep the number of trees, it should be net increase, and how do we monitor that? But potentially an additional KPI around canopy and how that links across to the green infrastructure strategy. By ward. Sorry, yes, I have written by ward. Yeah. Okay, is that all of those? Yeah. So sorry, strengthening communities. What does a regeneration KPI look like? So follow up rejected applications, etc. So with a note on how we can follow that up. Some definitions to be circulated, particularly in relation to community events supported. Some explanations to be added in around the RAG status, in particular around the many downtown centre and leisure park programme overviews. In terms of total number of new affordable homes, a recommendation obviously that this is actually broken down into the type with further information around if it's a flat, is it a 2-bedroom flat or 1-bedroom flat. But obviously that's an action to circulate that information. But also to look at the two targets around total number of new homes and total number of new affordable homes. If one's going up, why is the other not going up too? So understand the correlation between those two. And a possibility around equality and the future home standards as explained by Ruth. In terms of number of businesses engaged and or supported, definition to be refined and information to be circulated. And in terms of the very last one, which is around our partnership enabling with Hampshire Hospital Foundation Trust, is just being clear about, as an organisation, it working with them as a partner and enabling them, as opposed to us actually undertaking more than one meeting a year, but an enabling activity. What's anything on these ones? Oh, and sorry, on the EV chargers, the working and non-working. Oh, I missed one.
Is that it?
Councillor James.
Yeah.
Just as a visiting councillor, because I won't be here again, and I don't know if it's been a pain tonight, but can I ask you as a committee just to look at empty homes in the future, as to, that was a KPI, as to, you know, whether it was empty for so many months or in long-term empty homes after 2 years, and whether you would, we should be looking at having those back on. There's a large percentage of empty homes within Norden, within most wards, and we really should, in relation to the housing crisis that we have that as a KPI going forward. We never met it, and it was always an issue, and it disappeared, and I think it should come back, because I think it really is an important KPI to have.
So I'll make a note of that recommendation, but I'll also check to see whether it's actually included on the individual service plans for the service area.
Obviously going to that, I don't know whether you officers would like to go home, because I don't think we've got any need for you. Thank you very much for sitting there patiently.
Thank you.
Right, I've lost my will to live here a minute. I've lost the paper. It's item whatever, and it's a works programme.
Item 7.
Item 7, works programme. Just got everything there. As you can see, in November we have a full committee. We did discuss this prior to the meeting, and we intend to drop some of these out. Would you like to, or do you want me to?
No, I'm happy.
Are you sure?
So based on the conversation with the chair and the vice chair prior to the meeting, the suggestion is that some of these papers are deferred until January, where there are very few items. However, some of them are time sensitive. So the draft budget proposals, the new council plan and the draft parking strategy will need to come in November, even though they are three quite big chunky items. And the annual review of the council housing allocation scheme has been deferred from this meeting to that meeting. And again, I think the opinion of the chair and the vice chair that we spoke to was that that should still come to the November meeting. And therefore the two strategies, the digital and IT strategy, the new customer experience strategy, and the SWO closure report comes in January.
Are you happy with that? Right, I don't know, I've lost me, what we got on next, I think that's the end of the meeting, is it? That is the end of the meeting, I thought it was. I'd like to thank you for your contributions. I know it's been a long, maybe tedious meeting in a funny sort of way, but I think it's been an important way forward. And also I'd like to thank Sue and yourself for sitting there and Nadine for actually going through it, because it's not, we've looked at this a number of times and it's not been an easy process, and it's going to take, I believe, a few more of these over the years to get it exactly the way we, the councillors, like to see it. But it's work we're doing, and I think that's a progress thing. So thank you very much, and I hope I haven't bored you too much. Keep on cutting in and out and trying to shut you up and move you along.